The twin moons of Aura cast their violet light upon the ancient Colosseum, their purple glow illuminating the intricate stonework that had witnessed thousands of trials of terror throughout the planet's long history. Tonight marked the third Moonlight Cycle Festival, one of the most sacred ceremonies for the Khan people, where members of the royal houses would face their deepest fears in front of the entire kingdom. Princess Lyria Oren stood in the preparation chamber, her slender fingers trembling as she fastened the ceremonial silver armor across her chest. At 16, she was the youngest daughter of Warm Master Kale, representative of House Oren, and one of the most respected warriors in the kingdom. Tonight was her trial, her chance to prove herself worthy of her bloodline. "Remember," said her handmaiden, adjusting the royal circlet upon Lyria's midnight blue hair, "show no fear. The beasts can sense it." Lyria nodded, though her heart pounded against her ribcage like a trapped bird. The trial of terror was not meant to be lethal, at least not anymore. Modern neural binding technology allowed the Khan people to control the 6 sacred beasts, limiting their aggression while still making the trial a terrifying experience. The princess would not be in true danger, but the fear would be real. And that was the point. The ceremonial drum began its slow, rhythmic beating. It was time. Lyria stepped out of the preparation chamber into the curved passageway that led to the arena floor. The roar of the crowd above seemed distant, as if coming from another world. Her golden eyes, characteristic of House Oren, reflected the torchlight as she whispered a final prayer to the ancestors. "I will not fail you," she promised, her voice barely audible, even to herself. The massive stone doors groaned open, and Princess Lyria stepped into the Colosseum's center. The crowd fell silent. Thousands of eyes tracked her movement as she walked to the center of the arena, her ceremonial sword gleaming at her side, a weapon she was trained to use but, as tradition dictated, would never draw during the trial. Facing fear unarmed was the true test of nobility. High above in the royal box, Warm Master Kale sat rigid beside the other elders of the council. His face betrayed no emotion, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the armrests of his ceremonial chair. Beside him, High Elder Doris nodded approvingly as Lyria took her position. "Your daughter stands proud," Doris commented, his ancient voice cracking with age. "House Oren continues its tradition of courage." Kale inclined his head slightly, but said nothing. Pride and concern waged war within his chest. In the arena, Lyria stood perfectly still as the 6 gates around the Colosseum's perimeter slowly opened. From each emerged one of the sacred beasts of the Khan people. The blue water serpent, its scales glistening like liquid sapphire. The golden windhawk, its massive wings creating gusts that stirred the sand. The green earth bear, its mossy fur concealing powerful muscles. The silver lightning wolf, electricity crackling between its fangs. The black void panther, whose outlines seemed to shift and blur. And finally the red fire lion, its mane a dancing inferno that illuminated the entire arena. Each beast wore a thin metal collar, the neural binders that would prevent them from causing true harm, while allowing them to perform their role in the ancient ritual. The creatures padded forward, forming a circle around the princess. Their eyes, unnaturally bright with artificial intelligence enhancements, fixed upon her with predatory intensity. The High Elder rose from his seat, raising his staff. "Let the trial of terror begin." His voice boomed across the arena, amplified by ancient technology embedded within the stone walls. The beasts began their slow approach, a choreographed dance of terror that had been refined over centuries. Lyria stood motionless, her training taking over, as the fire lion roared, sending a wave of heat washing over her face. She did not flinch. This was the way of her people, to face fear, to acknowledge it, and to stand firm despite it. But something was wrong. The fire lion's movements suddenly became erratic. It shook its massive head, violently pawing at the neural binder around its neck. A small red light on the collar began to flash, a malfunction signal that sent a wave of whispers through the crowd. In the control chamber beneath the arena, Technicians frantically worked to re-establish connection. Neural pattern destabilizing. 1. Called out his fingers, flying across the ancient control panel. The fire beast is rejecting the binding algorithm. Reboot the system, another shouted. No time. Above, the fire lion let out a roar that was unlike the ceremonial warning it had been programmed to deliver. This was the authentic sound of a predator identifying prey. With a final violent shake, the neural binder sparked and fell from its neck, landing in the sand with a dull thud. Lyria's training faltered. This was not part of the trial. The beast before her was now truly dangerous, free from the technological restraints that had kept generations of nobles safe during the ceremony. Its golden eyes, no longer dulled by the neural interface, focused on her with primal hunger. In the royal box, Warm Master Kale leapt to his feet. "Stop the trial," he commanded, but the ancient protocols of the ceremony made intervention complicated. No trial had been interrupted in 700 years. High Elder Doris gripped his arm. "The sacred ritual cannot be—" "That's my daughter," Kale snarled, tearing free from the older man's grasp. The fire lion crouched, muscles tensing beneath its flame-wreathed hide. Lyria stepped backward, her ceremonial armor suddenly feeling pathetically inadequate. Her hand instinctively moved toward her sword, but she knew the thin ceremonial blade would do little against the beast's hide. The lion launched itself toward her in a blur of crimson and gold. In that moment, training and royal bearing fell away, leaving only raw human instinct. Princess Lyria Oren, 16th in line for the Khan throne, did what no royal had done during a trial in living memory. She screamed. The sound tore through the night air, raw and desperate, not the controlled cry of someone playing their part in a ritual, but the genuine plea of a young girl facing death. The sound echoed off the ancient stones, carrying beyond the Colosseum walls, beyond the royal city's boundaries, to the very edge of the wastelands where the exiles dwelled. And something answered. The fire lion was mid-leap when the arrow struck. The projectile seemed to materialize from nowhere, slicing through the air with impossible precision before burying itself deep in the beast's skull. The creature dropped instantly, momentum, carrying its body to rest mere inches from Lyria's feet. The flames of its mane sputtered and died, leaving only the scent of burnt fur in the suddenly silent arena. Gasps rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned toward the source of the arrow. Standing at the edge of the Colosseum floor, having somehow bypassed all security, was a figure unlike any normally permitted within the royal city. A human. The exile stood tall, bow still raised in the follow-through position of his shot. His clothing was the rough-spun fabric of the wastelands, patched and weathered by the harsh conditions of the exile territories. A hood concealed most of his features, but his stance radiated calm confidence. Guards immediately surrounded him, spears leveled at his chest, but he made no move to resist or flee. He simply lowered his bow and waited. Lyria stared at the stranger, her heart still racing from her near-death experience. She recognized the significance of what had just happened, even before the murmurs began to spread through the crowd. In the royal box, Elder Kira, the eldest council member and keeper of the ancient laws, rose slowly to her feet. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the now silent arena. "The calling law has been invoked." High Elder Doris turned to her sharply. "Impossible. That law has not been—" A royal blood cried out in genuine fear during a sacred ritual. Elder Kira interrupted, her ancient eyes fixed on Lyria and the human exile. And the cry was answered by one willing to risk their life. The calling law is clear and predates even the formation of the council. Warm. Master Kale looked between them, confusion momentarily overriding his relief at his daughter's safety. "What is this law you speak of?" Elder Kira's weathered hands gripped her ceremonial staff. "When royal blood cries out in true terror during a sacred ritual, and another answers that cry at risk to themselves, their souls become bound by ancient magic. It is one of the oldest laws of our people, from before we developed the neural technology to control the beasts." The implications of her words rippled through the gathering. Lyria, still standing beside the fallen fire lion, looked toward the human exile who had saved her life. The guards still surrounded him, uncertain what to do in such an unprecedented situation. High Elder Doris slammed his staff against the stone floor. "This is absurd. We cannot enforce a primitive law that would bind a princess of House Oren to a human exile. The law of calling is a relic, nothing more. The ancient laws cannot be dismissed simply because they have grown inconvenient." Elder Kira replied, her voice gathering strength. "The calling has been answered. The bond has already begun to form." As if to confirm her words, a faint purple glow, the same shade as the moonlight, seemed to shimmer briefly between Lyria and the human archer. Warm Master Kale descended from the royal box in long strides, guards parting before him as he approached his daughter. He placed himself between Lyria and the human exile hand, resting on his ceremonial sword. "I will not allow this," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "My daughter will not be bound to an exile." The human spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle for one who had survived the harsh wasteland. "I did not come seeking any bond or reward, Warm Master. I heard a cry for help and I answered." "How did you even enter the royal city?" demanded one of the guards. "The barriers have grown weak in places," the human finished. "Your technological defenses are failing, just as the neural binder failed tonight. I was hunting near the boundary when I heard the princess's scream." Elder Kira approached slowly, her ceremonial robes trailing in the arena sand. "What is your name, human?" The exile hesitated before pushing back his hood, revealing features weathered by the harsh conditions of the wasteland, but still youthful. His eyes were a startling blue, uncommon among the Khan people. "I am called Aaron," he replied, "once of the city, now of the wasteland." Recognition flickered across Elder Kira's face. "Aaron, you were exiled 15 years ago. You were just a child. My parents were scientists who questioned the Council's reliance on neural technology." Aaron replied, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of old pain. "Our entire family was banished. Only I survived the first winter in the wasteland." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Exile was the highest punishment in Khan society, reserved for those who threatened the established order. Few survived the harsh conditions of the wasteland, and those who did rarely approached the city boundaries. Warm Master Kale's expression hardened. "A child of traitors has no claim upon my daughter, regardless of ancient laws. The law of calling makes no distinction based on birth or status," Elder Kira said firmly. "It recognizes only the cry and the answer." High Elder Doris stepped forward, his elaborate robes swirling around him. "The Council cannot honor a law that would undermine the very foundations of our society. This human will be returned to exile, and we will proceed as if this disruption never occurred." But Elder Kira stood her ground. "If we dismiss the ancient laws when they become inconvenient, what purpose does the Council serve? We are meant to preserve traditions, not abandon them when they challenge our comfortable assumptions." The standoff continued, tension building in the arena as the remaining 5 beasts paced restlessly in their neural bindings. Princess Lyria, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward. "I owe this man my life," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Whatever law binds us, I accept its terms." Her father turned to her, shock evident on his face. "Lyria, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand that I would be dead if not for his arrow," she replied steadily. "And I understand that our traditions exist for a reason, even if we've forgotten what that reason is." The human Aaron regarded her with something like respect in his gaze. "Princess, I make no claim upon you. I acted only as any person of conscience would." "Nevertheless," Elder Kira interjected, "the calling law has been invoked. The bond forms whether you claim it or not. You are now linked by forces older than the Council itself." High Elder Doris signaled to the guards. "Take the human to the holding chambers. The Council will deliberate on this matter in private." As the guards moved to escort Aaron away, Lyria felt a strange sensation, like an invisible thread pulling taut between her and the exile. The remnant violet glow pulsed once before fading. "What happens now?" she asked Elder Kira quietly, as Aaron was led away. The ancient woman smiled faintly. "Now, Princess of House Oren, you begin to understand what the trial of terror was truly meant to teach before we tamed it with technology. Not that fear should be conquered alone, but that there is no shame in calling for help when truly afraid." Warm Master Kale placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "This changes nothing. The council will not allow an exile to claim royal privilege." Elder Kira's smile faded. "The bond of the calling law is not about privilege, Warm Master. It is about responsibility on both sides. You would do well to remember that some traditions exist not to elevate the royal houses, but to humble them." With those cryptic words, she turned and followed the procession, leaving the arena, leaving Lyria and her father standing beside the fallen fire beast, a creature that had nearly ended a royal line, only to forge an unexpected connection instead. The emergency council meeting lasted well into the night. Lyria was confined to her chambers ostensibly for her own recovery, though she suspected it was more to keep her separated from the human exile. Through her window, she could see torches burning in the council tower, silhouettes of animated figures, gesturing forcefully as the debate raged on. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Her handmaiden Nira entered with downcast eyes. "The council has requested your presence, Princess," she said quietly. "They've reached a decision." Lyria straightened her ceremonial attire, which she had not bothered to change. "Has my father sent any message?" Nira shook her head. "Warm Master Kale has been in close discussion with High Elder Doris for the past hour. They seemed agitated." That didn't bode well. Lyria steeled herself and followed Nira through the palace corridors. Guards lined the path, their expressions carefully neutral, though she could feel their eyes following her with newfound curiosity. Word of what had happened at the trial and the invocation of the ancient calling law had clearly spread throughout the royal compound. The council chamber was a circular room atop the highest tower of the palace, its walls made of transparent crystal that offered a panoramic view of the city and the wasteland beyond. The 12 members of the royal council sat in an inner circle, while Aaron stood in the center, still under guard, but now dressed in clean clothes that marked him as neither citizen nor prisoner, a strange liminal status that reflected the unprecedented nature of the situation. Lyria was directed to stand beside him. Up close, she could study the exile more carefully. His face bore the weathered look of one who had survived harsh conditions, but his eyes remained clear and focused. He stood with his back straight, showing neither defiance nor submission to the assembled council. High Elder Doris spoke first, his voice brittle, with barely contained frustration. "Princess Lyria of House Oren, the council has reviewed the ancient texts regarding the law of calling. It appears that Elder Kira's interpretation is technically correct." Elder Kira, seated opposite Doris, offered a thin smile, but remained silent. "However," Doris continued, "the practical application of such an archaic law presents numerous complications in our modern society. The law of calling dates from a time when our people faced daily threats from the uncontrolled sacred beasts, before neural binding technology provided safety and civilization." Warm Master Kale leaned forward. "The council proposes a compromise. While acknowledging the spiritual bond that is formed, we will not require any practical alliance between House Oren and an exile. The human will be granted a limited pardon, allowed to live in the outer ring of the city, rather than the wasteland, but will have no claim upon you or House Oren." Lyria glanced at Aaron, whose expression remained impassive. Elder Kira tapped her staff against the crystal floor, drawing all eyes to her. "That is not what the ancient law prescribes. The bond created by the calling is meant to be honored, not merely acknowledged." "What exactly does this bond entail?" Lyria asked, addressing her question to Elder Kira directly. "What would the law have us do?" Elder Kira's ancient eyes seemed to brighten. In the old days when one answered the calling of another, they became bound in purpose and spirit. They would walk each other's paths, learn each other's truths. The calling exists to remind the royal houses that strength comes not from isolation, but from connection, even with those we have cast aside. High Elder Doris scoffed. Poetic sentiments that have no place in practical governance. The neural technology that failed tonight will be thoroughly examined and repaired. This unfortunate incident need not disrupt the order we have maintained for centuries. And if the technology continues to fail, Aaron spoke for the first time since Lyria had entered. All eyes turned to him. The neural binders are degrading. I've seen it in the beasts that roam the wasteland borders. Your control is slipping. You overstep exile, growled one of the younger council members. You stand here on sufferance alone. He stands here because he saved my life, Lyria interjected, surprising herself with her boldness. And he speaks of matters that concern all our people. If the neural technology is failing, shouldn't we listen to someone who has witnessed it firsthand? Warm. Master Kale's expression softened slightly as he regarded his daughter. Lyria, your gratitude does you credit, but you must understand the complexities of maintaining order in our society. The exile territories exist for a reason. Those who reject our ways cannot be integrated without undermining the very foundations of our civilization. Perhaps those foundations need examination, Elder Kira suggested quietly. The law of calling exists as a reminder that our people once lived differently, with different values. Perhaps its invocation now, after so many generations, is itself meaningful. The council chamber fell silent as the members considered her words. Even High Elder Doris seemed momentarily at a loss for a rebuttal. Finally, another council member, Elder Toran of the Southern Territories, cleared his throat. Whatever philosophical discussions may arise from this incident, we must reach a practical resolution. I propose that we honor the letter of the ancient law, while adapting its application to modern circumstances. Meaning, prompted Elder Kira. The princess and the exile will indeed be bound by the calling, Elder Toran explained, but in a limited capacity. The human will serve as a consultant on matters relating to the wasteland and the failing neural technology. He will be granted restricted access to the city, always under supervision, and Princess Lyria will serve as his sponsor and liaison to the council. Murmurs of consideration rippled through the chamber. It was a compromise that might satisfy both tradition and pragmatism. "And what are my obligations in this arrangement?" Aaron asked, his tone neutral. High Elder Doris leaned forward. "You will share all you know of the wasteland beasts and the weaknesses in our technological barriers. You will submit to regular examination to ensure the spiritual bond does not have unforeseen consequences. And you will swear loyalty to the council and its decisions." Aaron's expression remained unchanged. "I can share knowledge freely. I cannot swear loyalty to policies I may find unconscionable." "You are hardly in a position to dictate terms," Doris snapped. "Yet, here I stand," Aaron replied steadily, "invited into your innermost chamber after years of exile. Perhaps positions are more fluid than you believe, High Elder." Before Doris could respond, Lyria stepped forward. "I accept the bond and the responsibilities it entails. If Aaron is willing to share his knowledge of the wasteland, I am willing to learn from him and to speak for him before the council." Warm Master Kale studied his daughter with a mixture of concern and pride. "You understand that this association may affect your standing among the royal houses?" "I understand that my life was saved by someone our society had discarded," Lyria replied. "Perhaps that lesson is worth whatever standing it might cost me." A ripple of reactions passed through the council, some approving, others disturbed by her words. Elder Kira's expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "Very well," High Elder Doris declared, clearly eager to conclude the matter. "Let it be recorded that the council acknowledges the invocation of the law of calling between Princess Lyria of House Oren and the exile Aaron. Their bond will be honored within the limitations described, and a formal ceremony will take place after the conclusion of the Third Moonlight Festival. With that, the meeting was adjourned. As the council members filed out, Elder Kira paused beside Lyria and Aaron. "The old laws have teeth yet?" she murmured, a glint in her ancient eyes. "Walk carefully, but walk boldly, both of you. More hangs in the balance than the council yet realizes." Before Lyria could ask what she meant, the old woman had moved on, leaving the princess and the exile standing together in the crystal chamber as the first light of dawn broke over the distant horizon. The days that followed passed in a blur of activity. The remainder of the Third Moonlight Festival proceeded with modified ceremonies. The death of the fire beast and the invocation of the calling law had cast a shadow over the traditional celebrations. The other royal children scheduled for their trials of terror were given a temporary reprieve, while the neural binding technology underwent rigorous examination. Lyria found herself in an unusual position. Though technically still a princess of House Orin, her impending bond with an exile had created a subtle but palpable distance between her and the other royal children. They regarded her with a mixture of curiosity, pity, and in some cases disdain. "Is it true that you're to be paired with a wasteland savage?" asked Prince Nellin of House Tiral during one of the festival banquets. His tone was light, but laced with malice. "His name is Aaron," Lyria replied evenly, "and he survived 15 years in the wasteland after being exiled as a child. There's nothing savage about that kind of resilience." Prince Nellin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How charitable of you to defend your pet exile. I wonder if you'll still speak so highly of him when you smell the wasteland on his skin during the binding ceremony." Lyria was spared from responding by the arrival of Elder Kira, who seemed to have developed a habit of appearing whenever tensions arose around the unusual situation. "Prince Nellin," the old woman said pleasantly, "I believe your father is looking for you. Something about your own trial preparations which I understand have been postponed." The young prince flushed and excused himself clearly, unwilling to cross the respected elder. "You'll face more of that," Elder Kira commented, once he had gone. "The royal houses fear change more than they fear the sacred beasts themselves." Lyria sipped her ceremonial wine, a bitter concoction that was more tradition than pleasure. "Why are you supporting this bond, Elder?" The other council members seemed determined to minimize it, yet you insist on its importance. Elder Kira's weathered face creased in a smile. "I have lived long enough to see the cycles of our society, Princess. The neural technology that we rely upon that separates us from the beasts and defines our civilization is failing. Not just one collar in one ceremony, but gradually throughout our territories. The signs have been there for those willing to see them." "And what does that have to do with the law of calling?" "Everything," the old woman replied, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "The calling was our way before the neural technology. It represented a different relationship with the sacred beasts, one of respect and cooperation, rather than domination. I believe your bond with Aaron may be the first step in rediscovering what we have lost." Before Lyria could press further, the elder moved away, leaving the princess with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, Aaron had been installed in quarters in the outer ring of the royal city, lavish by wasteland standards, but modest compared to the accommodations of even the lowest-ranking noble houses. He was permitted limited movement within the city, always under the watchful eye of royal guards, and spent much of his time being questioned by technicians about the behavior of beasts in the wasteland. Lyria was allowed to visit him only under supervision, ostensibly to prepare for the binding ceremony. During these brief meetings, she found herself increasingly curious about the man who had saved her life. "How did you learn to shoot with such accuracy?" she asked during one such visit, watching as he methodically maintained the bow that had taken down the fire beast. Aaron's hands moved with practiced precision across the weapon's curve. "Necessity. In the wasteland, you don't get second chances. Miss your shot at dinner and you go hungry. Miss your shot at a predator, and you become dinner. And yet you risked your one arrow on a stranger." His blue eyes met hers briefly. "Not a risk, a choice." "Why make that choice for someone from the city that exiled you?" Aaron set down the bow. A cry for help doesn't have a house or a status princess. It's just a human sound, and I'm just human enough to answer it. Something about his words resonated with Lyria, cutting through the layers of royal training and ceremonial detachment that had been instilled in her since childhood. She found herself wondering what other lessons the wasteland might have taught this man that the royal city, for all its ancient wisdom and technological advancement, had forgotten. The binding ceremony was scheduled for the final night of the festival, timed to coincide with the moment when both moons would be perfectly aligned above the royal city, a rare astronomical event that occurred only once every 60 years. It was to be a subdued affair by royal standards, with only the council members and a few representatives from each noble house in attendance. Warm Master Kale visited his daughter in her chambers as she prepared for the ceremony. He had been distant in the days following the council's decision, his disapproval evident, though largely unspoken. "You can still refuse this," he said without preamble, watching as her handmaidens adorned her with the traditional silver and amethyst jewelry of a calling bond ornaments that had not been worn in generations. Lyria met his gaze in the mirror. "The council has decided. The council can be persuaded to reconsider. Your mother and I have influence." "And what about the law of calling itself?" Lyria interrupted, turning to face him directly. "Elder Kira believes it exists for a reason beyond mere tradition." Kale's expression hardened. "Kira is the oldest among us and clings to ways that have no place in modern Khan society. The neural technology has served us for centuries." "The neural technology failed, Father. It nearly cost me my life." "A single malfunction that will be corrected," he insisted. Lyria stood, the ceremonial robes flowing around her like liquid silver. "What if it's not just a single malfunction? Aaron says the beasts in the wasteland are changing, breaking free of the neural influences at the borders." "And you would take the word of an exile over the wisdom of the council?" Her father's voice rose slightly, frustration evident. "I would consider all sources of knowledge, especially when my own experience confirms that something is wrong." Lyria took a deep breath. "Father, I'm not refusing my duties to House Oren, but perhaps there's a purpose to this bond that we don't yet understand." Warm Master Kale studied his daughter, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his features. Finally, he sighed. "You have your mother's stubborn wisdom. I cannot force you to reject this path, but I will not pretend to approve of it either." "I'm not asking for approval," Lyria replied gently. "Only for trust that I might discover something important through this bond." Her father nodded stiffly, then reached into his ceremonial robes and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. "This belonged to your grandmother. She was unorthodox in her thinking as well. Perhaps it will serve you in the days ahead." Lyria unwrapped the silk to reveal a pendant of unusual design, a circular stone of deep violet, similar to the color of Ara's moons, set in a silver frame, shaped like intertwined branches. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's also ancient," Kyle replied. "From before the neural technology, like the law of calling itself. Your grandmother believed it had properties related to the sacred beasts. I always thought it merely a superstition, but perhaps there is wisdom in old things that I have failed to appreciate." He fastened the pendant around her neck, the stone cool against her skin. "Be careful, daughter. Change comes at a cost, and I fear you may be the one to pay it." With that ominous warning, he left her to complete her preparations for the ceremony that would bind her fate to that of the exile. The binding ceremony took place in the oldest section of the royal palace, a circular chamber deep beneath the modern structures, its walls carved directly from the bedrock of the planet. Ancient symbols, their meanings long forgotten by most, spiraled across the ceiling and floor, illuminated by the violet moonlight that was channeled down through a series of mirrors and crystals from the twin moons above. The members of the council stood in a circle around the central platform where Lyria and Aaron would take their places. Each council member wore ceremonial robes, representing their territories and houses, creating a living mosaic of Khan society. High Elder Doris presided over the ceremony, his expression stern beneath his elaborate headdress. Aaron entered, first escorted by guards who positioned him on the western side of the circular platform. He wore simple garments of wasteland design, but crafted from finer materials, a compromise between his identity as an exile and his new status as one bound by the calling. His bow and a single arrow, symbolic replacements for the ones that had killed the fire beast, hung at his back. Lyria entered from the eastern side, the traditional direction of noble processions. Her silver robes shimmered in the moonlight, and her grandmother's pendant seemed to pulse gently against her throat. The violet color matched the moonlight exactly, creating the illusion that she carried a piece of Aura's celestial bodies with her. As they took their positions facing each other across the platform, Lyria noticed something unexpected in Aaron's expression. Not the stoicism or resignation she had anticipated, but a quiet alertness, as if he were measuring the chamber and all within it against some private standard. High Elder Doris raised his ceremonial staff. "We gather beneath the twin moons to witness the honoring of the law of calling, a bond formed in crisis, acknowledged in tradition, and shaped to serve the continuing stability of our society." His choice of words was telling. Even in this ancient ritual, the emphasis was on control and order, rather than the deeper meaning Elder Kira had hinted at. "Princess Lyria of House Orin," Doris continued, "step forward and declare your acceptance of the bond." Lyria advanced to the center of the platform. "I, Lyria of House Orin, acknowledge the law of calling that binds me to Aaron of the Wasteland. I accept the responsibility to hear his counsel and to speak his wisdom before the council when matters of the Wasteland arise." Her careful wording matched exactly what had been prepared for her, neither rejecting the bond nor embracing more than the council had prescribed. Aaron of the Wasteland. Doris turned to the exile. "Step forward and declare your acceptance of the bond and your fealty to the council." Aaron stepped forward, his movements measured and deliberate. The chamber grew exceptionally quiet as all waited for his response. The script prepared for him included a pledge of loyalty that he had previously resisted. "I, Aaron of the Wasteland, acknowledge the law of calling that binds me to Princess Lyria of House Orin." He began following the expected words. But then, he continued in his own terms. "I offer my knowledge freely for the benefit of all who dwell in city and wasteland alike, and I pledge to honor the bond between us with truth and courage." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members. The omission of the loyalty pledge was glaring, but interrupting the ceremony would create a greater disruption than allowing the modified acceptance. High Elder Doris's jaw tightened visibly, but he proceeded. "Join hands to complete the bond." Lyria extended her hands, palms upward, in the traditional gesture of royal condescension. To her surprise, Aaron did not place his hands atop hers, as protocol dictated, but instead turned his own palms upward as well, creating an equality in the gesture that was subtle but unmistakable. After a moment's hesitation, Lyria adjusted her position, bringing their hands together as equals. As their fingers interlaced, the violet moonlight seemed to intensify, pooling around their joined hands. Elder Kira stepped forward, her ancient voice rising in the traditional invocation. "By the light of the twin moons, by the cry that was uttered, and the answer that came by the arrow that found its mark, and the life that was preserved, let the calling be honored. Let these two souls know each other's paths, share each other's burdens, and find together what neither could discover alone." As the final words of the invocation echoed through the chamber, Lyria felt a curious sensation, a warmth spreading from her hands up her arms, centering finally over her heart. The pendant at her throat grew warmer, and for a moment she thought she glimpsed something in Aaron's eyes, not just the reflection of moonlight, but a deeper understanding passing between them. Then, High Elder Doris struck his staff against the stone floor, breaking the moment. "The bond is acknowledged. The ceremony is complete. Let all present recognize that Princess Lyria of House Orin and Aaron of the Wasteland are now joined by the law of calling within the limitations prescribed by the council. As the assembled dignitaries began to disperse, Elder Kira approached the still-joined pair. "The ceremony may be complete," she said quietly, "but the bond has only begun to form. What grows from it depends not on the council's limitations, but on your willingness to truly walk each other's paths." Over the weeks that followed, an uneasy routine developed. Aaron was granted increased freedom within the royal city, though still under observation. He met regularly with the technicians responsible for maintaining the neural binding technology, sharing his observations of the sacred beasts in the wasteland. Many of his insights proved valuable, confirming what some had already suspected: the neural control was indeed weakening across all territories. Lyria found herself in an ambiguous position. Her formal duties as a princess of House Orin continued, but she was also expected to serve as Aaron's liaison to the royal court. This dual role kept her constantly moving between worlds: the familiar luxury of the inner palace and the more austere quarters where Aaron was housed in the outer ring. To her surprise, she found the latter increasingly refreshing. Away from the elaborate protocols and performances of royal life, conversations with Aaron offered a directness she had rarely experienced. "Your technicians are approaching the problem from the wrong direction," Aaron explained during one of their meetings, sketching a rough diagram on a piece of parchment. "They keep trying to strengthen the neural signals, but that's what's causing the beasts to resist. It's like shouting louder at someone who doesn't speak your language. It doesn't improve understanding, it just creates resentment." Lyria studied the diagram. "What would you suggest instead?" "The neural technology was originally designed to work with the beasts' natural instincts, not against them. Somewhere along the way, your scientists began forcing compliance rather than inviting cooperation. The beasts are intelligent enough to recognize the difference." "And how would you invite cooperation with creatures that can breathe fire or channel lightning?" Lyria asked, genuinely curious. Aaron set down his writing tool. "The same way the first Khan settlers did before the neural technology. They studied the beasts, learned their habits and needs, and found ways to align those with human objectives. The oldest stories say they could even communicate directly with the sacred creatures." "Those are just children's tales," Lyria said, though without conviction. Since the binding ceremony, she had found herself increasingly open to possibilities that would have seemed absurd just weeks before. "Perhaps," Aaron shrugged. "But my parents were researching those very tales before they were exiled. They believed there might be truth in them, biological, not just mythological." This revelation caught Lyria's attention. "What exactly were your parents studying?" "They were neurobiologists specializing in interspecies communication. They discovered evidence that the sacred beasts possess a form of collective consciousness, a shared neural network that allows them to communicate across vast distances. They believed humans might once have been able to access this network directly." "And that's why they were exiled?" Lyria asked, frowning. "For researching ancient communication methods?" "They were exiled because their research suggested that the neural binding technology was fundamentally flawed, that it was damaging the beast's natural abilities, and would eventually fail completely." Aaron's expression darkened. "The council didn't want to hear that the foundation of their power was built on a technology with an expiration date." Lyria considered this. "If what you say is true, then the current failures aren't just isolated incidents. They're the beginning of a systemic collapse." "Precisely," Aaron nodded grimly. "And when the neural bindings fail completely, the relationship between the Khan people and the sacred beasts will change forever. The question is whether that change will come through understanding or through conflict." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a royal messenger summoning Lyria to an emergency council meeting. Reports had come in from the outer territories of multiple neural binding failures, not just with ceremonial beasts, but with those used for agriculture, transportation, and defense. The crisis was accelerating. The council chamber was in an uproar when Lyria arrived. Representatives from various territories were reporting similar incidents, sacred beasts breaking free of control, some fleeing into the wilderness, others becoming aggressive. Thus far, casualties had been minimal, but the pattern was clear and deeply concerning. The neural binding algorithms are being rejected at an accelerating rate, reported the chief technician, his usual composure shattered by the scope of the crisis. We've implemented the strengthened signals as approved by the Council, but they're only making the beasts more resistant. High Elder Doris pounded his fist on the table. This is unacceptable. The sacred beasts have been under our control for centuries. Find the flaw in the system and correct it. Warm Master Kale, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. Perhaps we need to consider that the flaw isn't new, but fundamental. My daughter reports that the exile Aaron has insights that align with what we're observing. All eyes turned to Lyria, who straightened under their collective gaze. Aaron believes that the neural technology has been working against the beast's natural instincts, rather than with them. His parents were researchers who predicted this very situation before they were exiled. High Elder Doris scoffed. And we should trust the theories of convicted traitors preposterous. Is it more preposterous than ignoring information that might save lives? Lyria challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. The neural bindings are failing. That's not theory, it's happening right now across all territories. Elder Kira, who had been silent until now, tapped her staff gently on the floor. I move that we bring Aaron before the Council directly. Let him present his knowledge without intermediaries. Seconded, said Warm Master Kale, earning a grateful glance from his daughter. After a brief but heated debate, the motion carried by a narrow margin. Guards were dispatched to bring Aaron to the chamber, while the reports of neural binding failures continued to pour in. When Aaron arrived, he showed none of the deference expected of one addressing the Council. He stood straight, his eyes clear and direct as he listened to the reports being presented. You claim to have insight into these failures, High Elder Doris said when the reports concluded. Speak then. But understand that lives are at stake. This is no time for exile philosophies or ancient superstitions. Aaron nodded once. The neural binding technology was originally designed to enhance natural connections between humans and the sacred beasts, not to impose control. Over generations, you've modified it to prioritize domination over communication. The beasts have been adapting, developing resistance. What you're seeing now isn't a sudden failure. It's the culmination of a process that's been underway for decades. If that's true, questioned another council member, why now? Why are we seeing widespread failures all at once? Because resistance spreads through their collective consciousness, Aaron explained. Once enough beasts developed effective resistance, they began sharing it with others of their kind. You've essentially been facing an immune response that's reached critical mass. The chief technician looked troubled. This aligns with some anomalous neural patterns we've been observing, but couldn't explain. Can the binding technology be modified to work as it originally did? Elder Kira asked. Aaron shook his head. It's too late for that. The beasts now associate the neural implants with control and pain. Any similar technology will trigger the same resistance. Then, what do you suggest? Demanded Warm Master Kale. That we simply abandon centuries of civilization and return to a time when the sacred beasts roamed freely. Not abandon, Aaron replied. Evolve. There are other ways to connect with the beasts, older ways that my people in the wasteland have been rediscovering by necessity. Your people, High Elder Doris raised an eyebrow. You speak of the exiles as if they were a legitimate society. We are, Aaron said simply. When you cast us out, we had to adapt or die. Many died, but those who survived learned to coexist with the wild beasts of the wasteland. Not through technology, but through understanding. A murmur ran through the council. The idea that the exiles had built their own functional society, one that might hold solutions to the current crisis, was clearly disturbing to many of the assembled dignitaries. Even if what you say is true, High Elder Doris said dismissively, a few exiles living in harmony with wild beasts is hardly a model for our entire civilization. We have cities, agriculture, transportation networks, all dependent on the sacred beasts under proper control. Elder Kira leaned forward. Perhaps the exile can show us, rather than tell us, a demonstration of these alternative methods. All eyes turned to Aaron, who considered for a moment before nodding. I can, but not here. You would need to come to the border of the wasteland where the wild beasts gather. The suggestion that the council should leave the safety of the royal city to visit the edge of exile territories was met with immediate resistance. Yet, as more reports arrived of neural binding failures spreading throughout the kingdom, the options were narrowing. Finally, Elder Kira proposed a compromise. A small delegation would accompany Aaron to the border, including Lyria, as bound by the calling law, Elder Kira herself, and volunteers from among the technicians and council members. High Elder Doris refused to participate personally, but authorized the expedition on the condition that it would be heavily guarded and would return with actionable solutions, not merely philosophical observations. As preparations were made for the journey, Lyria found herself filled with both apprehension and a strange excitement. Since her binding with Aaron, she had felt a growing curiosity about the wasteland and its inhabitants, both human and beast. The pendant her father had given her seemed warmer against her skin, particularly when she and Aaron discussed the sacred beasts. On the morning of their departure, Warm Master Kale came to bid his daughter farewell. To her surprise, he was dressed for travel. "Father," she questioned, taking in his practical attire, far removed from his usual ceremonial robes. "You didn't think I would let my daughter journey to the wasteland without me, did you?" he said, attempting a light tone, though his concern was evident. Lyria embraced him, genuinely grateful for his presence. "I thought you disapproved of this entire endeavor." "I disapprove of many things," he replied, returning the embrace. "But I am beginning to wonder if my disapproval has been too reflexive a defense of tradition, without sufficient understanding of why those traditions exist." It was the closest thing to an endorsement of her path that she could have hoped for. Together, they joined the small but well-equipped expedition gathering in the royal courtyard. The journey to the wasteland border took 3 days. As they traveled, the manicured landscapes of the inner territories gave way to increasingly wild terrain. The neural-controlled agricultural beasts became less common, and the settlements more dispersed. By the 3rd day, they had reached the final outpost before the official boundary of exile territory. The outpost commander was visibly nervous as he briefed them on recent events. "We've had increased beast activity along the border for months now. The neural repulsion barriers are functioning at only 60% efficiency. Several wild beasts have penetrated as far as this outpost." "Casualties?" asked Warm Master Kale. "None yet," the commander replied. "Strangely, the beasts seem more curious than aggressive. Still, we maintain combat readiness at all times." Aaron, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "The beasts aren't attacking because they're not inherently hostile. They're exploring territory that was once closed to them because the barriers are weakening." The commander eyed him with suspicion. "You're the exile they sent to advise the council. No offense, but we've been trained to handle sacred beasts for generations." "And how is that training serving you now that the neural technology is failing?" Aaron asked mildly. The commander had no answer to that. They set up camp just within the boundary of controlled territory, with the wasteland visible beyond the last line of neural barrier pylons. These tall structures emitted a field that discouraged the sacred beasts from crossing into Khan territory, but several were visibly damaged or functioning at reduced capacity. As dusk fell, Elder Kira gathered the expedition members around the central fire. "Tomorrow we will cross into the wasteland with Aaron as our guide. For many of you, this will be your first time setting foot in exile territory. It is important to understand that we go not as conquerors or judges, but as seekers of knowledge that may save our civilization." Warm Master Kale looked uncomfortable, but nodded his agreement. The technological experts from the royal city were visibly anxious, while the guards maintained stoic expressions that didn't quite mask their unease. Lyria found herself drawn to the edge of camp, gazing out at the wasteland as darkness fell. The landscape beyond the barriers was not the barren desert she had imagined from childhood stories, but a wild, untamed version of Ara's natural environment, more chaotic than the controlled territories but vibrant with life. Aaron joined her at the perimeter. "It's beautiful in its own way, isn't it?" he said quietly. She nodded. "It's not what I expected. The stories make the wasteland sound like a place of death and suffering. For many exiles it is. Those who couldn't adapt." His voice held old pain. "But for those who learn to live with the land rather than trying to control it, there's a freedom here that doesn't exist in the city." "And the beasts, how did you learn to coexist with them?" Aaron was silent for a moment. "That's better shown than told. Tomorrow you'll understand." As the twin moons rose, casting their violet light over the landscape, Lyria noticed movement in the distance, large shapes moving with fluid grace along the ridgeline. Sacred beasts wild and free, watching the camp from afar. "They're curious about us," Aaron observed. "Particularly about you." Lyria turned to him in surprise. "Me, why?" "Your pendant." He nodded toward the violet stone at her throat. "It resonates with them." "Where did you get it?" "It was my grandmother's," Lyria replied, touching the stone, which felt unusually warm. "My father gave it to me before the binding ceremony." "Your grandmother must have been an interesting woman," Aaron said with the ghost of a smile. "That stone isn't just decorative. It's an amplifier, a tool from before the neural technology, used to enhance natural communication with the sacred beasts." Lyria stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because my parents were searching for such artifacts before their exile. They believed these stones were the key to the original relationship between humans and beasts." He gazed at the distant creatures. They would have been fascinated to know one had remained in royal possession all this time. The revelation sent Lyria's mind spinning with questions, but before she could voice them, a commotion arose from the center of camp. One of the guards was pointing toward the neural barrier, where a section had flickered and gone dark. Through the gap, a creature was approaching a young Earth, bare its mossy fur gleaming silver-green in the moonlight. Guards immediately raised their weapons, but Elder Kira held up a hand. "Wait, let us see what happens." The Earth Bear padded calmly into the camp, apparently unafraid of the humans gathered there. Its intelligent eyes scanned the group before settling on Lyria and Aaron at the perimeter. With deliberate movements, it approached them. Warm Master Kale moved to intercept it, his hand on his ceremonial sword, but Aaron called out, "Don't threaten it. It's not here to attack." The Earth Bear stopped a few paces from Lyria, its massive head tilted in what appeared to be curiosity. The pendant at her throat was now visibly glowing with a soft violet light that matched the beast's gaze. "It's responding to the stone," Aaron said quietly. "Stay calm and try not to project fear." Lyria's heart was racing, but not entirely from fear. There was something else, a strange sense of recognition, as if the creature before her were not entirely alien. On impulse, she took a small step forward and slowly extended her hand palm up. "Lyria," her father called in alarm, but Elder Kira restrained him with a surprising strength for one so ancient. "Let it happen," the old woman insisted. "This is why we came." The Earth Bear regarded Lyria's extended hand for a long moment, before leaning forward, and gently, incredibly gently, for a creature of its size pressing its snout against her palm. The contact sent a jolt of sensation up her arm, not pain, but a kind of awareness, as if a door had opened in her mind. Impressions flooded through the connection, curiosity, caution, and an ancient recognition that seemed to bypass her conscious mind and speak directly to something more fundamental within her. For a breathtaking moment, Lyria understood what it was to be an Earth Bear, to feel the planet's rhythms through padded feet, to draw nourishment from both soil and sun, to exist in communion with others of its kind across vast distances. Then the connection faded, as the bear withdrew, regarding her with what she now recognized as intelligence rather than mere animal instinct. It turned, padding calmly back toward the gap in the barrier and disappearing into the night. The camp erupted in astonished conversation. The technicians were already taking readings and debating theories, while the guards remained tense, weapons still half raised. Warm Master Kale rushed to his daughter's side, checking her for injuries, despite the obvious fact that the bear had made no aggressive moves. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with concern. "What did it do to you?" Lyria was still processing the experience, her hand tingling where the beast had touched it. "It showed me. It let me feel what it's like to be connected. Not controlled, not dominated, but truly linked." She looked at Aaron, whose expression held understanding. "This is what your parents were researching, isn't it? Direct communication, rather than neural control." He nodded. "The stones amplify natural empathic abilities that all con people once possessed, but have largely lost through generations of reliance on technology. Some still carry the potential, especially those of the oldest bloodlines." Elder Kira approached her ancient eyes, alight with a youthful excitement. "I haven't seen such a connection in 70 years. Not since the old rituals were abandoned in favor of the neural technology." She turned to the assembled technicians. "You see, there are alternatives to control. There always have been." The chief technician looked skeptical. "A single interaction with a young beast hardly constitutes a viable replacement for the neural binding network that supports our entire civilization." "It's a beginning," Elder Kira insisted, "and more than you've accomplished with all your efforts to reinforce the failing neural technology." As the debate continued, Aaron drew Lyria aside. "Tomorrow we'll cross fully into the wasteland. What you experienced tonight is just the surface of what's possible. Are you willing to go deeper?" Lyria thought of the sensation of connection she had felt, brief but profound. Something about it had awakened an awareness she hadn't known she possessed. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I need to understand." The next morning, the expedition prepared to cross the boundary into exile territory. Several members elected to remain at the outpost, their scientific skepticism outweighed by fear of the unknown lands beyond the barrier. In the end, the group that ventured into the wasteland consisted of Lyria, Aaron, Elder Kira Worm, Master Kale, who refused to let his daughter go without him, 2 royal guards who volunteered, despite their obvious apprehension, and 1 brave technician who was more curious than afraid. As they passed beyond the last functioning neural barrier, Lyria felt a subtle shift, not in the physical environment, which changed gradually from controlled to wild, but in something less tangible. A pressure she hadn't been aware of suddenly lifted, as if she'd been hearing a high-pitched tone all her life that abruptly stopped. "You feel it," Aaron observed, watching her reaction. "The neural barriers don't just keep beasts out. They dampen the natural connections between all living things. That's why the pendant works better on this side." The violet stone at Lyria's throat did indeed seem more vibrant now, pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat. She found herself more aware of her surroundings, the patterns of vegetation, the movements of small creatures in the underbrush, the very air currents that brushed her skin. Warm Master Kale watched his daughter with a mixture of concern and dawning realization. "Your grandmother used to describe a similar sensation when she ventured near the boundaries," he admitted reluctantly. "I always attributed it to her eccentric nature." Elder Kira chuckled. Dalia Oren was many things, but eccentric was not one of them. She understood the old ways better than most of the council ever did. Their path led them deeper into the wasteland, following game trails that wound through increasingly lush vegetation. Contrary to the royal city's teachings about exile territories, this land was not barren, but thriving with a wild vitality that contrasted sharply with the manicured precision of the controlled zones. By midday, they had reached a clearing where a small settlement was visible, simple structures built from local materials, but arranged with evident care and purpose. As they approached, Lyria was startled to see humans moving among the building's exiles. Like Aaron, dozens of them living in what appeared to be a functional community. "Welcome to Haven," Aaron said, a note of pride in his voice. "One of several exile settlements that have formed over the generations." Warm Master Kale stared in undisguised shock. "We were told most exiles perished in the wasteland." "Many did," Aaron acknowledged grimly. "Especially in the early days when being cast out was tantamount to a death sentence. But humans adapt. Those who survived learned how to live here, and eventually how to thrive." As they entered the settlement, Lyria noticed something extraordinary: sacred beasts moving freely among the human inhabitants. Not just one or two, but many adolescent fire lions curled near cooking pits, their flames carefully regulated to provide heat. Small lightning wolves running playful circles around children. Earth bears helping to move heavy objects with their tremendous strength. None wore neural binders or any visible restraints. The exile inhabitants regarded the visitors with caution that bordered on hostility, particularly the uniformed guards. But when they recognized Aaron, a ripple of excitement passed through the community. An older woman approached, embracing Aaron warmly, before turning curious eyes on the visitors. "These are representatives from the royal city," Aaron explained. "They've come to learn about our ways with the sacred beasts." The woman's weathered face registered surprise. "After all this time, what's changed?" "The neural technology is failing," Elder Kira replied, before Aaron could answer. "The sacred beasts are breaking free of control throughout Khan territory." This news seemed to confirm something the exiles had already suspected. Murmurs spread through the gathering crowd. "We've noticed increased activity along the borders," the woman acknowledged. "More beasts coming through, seeking refuge from the neural fields." She studied Lyria with particular interest. "And who is this who wears the speaking stone?" "Princess Lyria of House Orin," Aaron introduced her. "We are bound by the calling law." This announcement caused an even greater stir among the exiles. An elderly man pushed forward through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Lyria's pendant. "The calling law," he repeated, voice thick with emotion. "Not invoked in generations. And now, when the bonds are breaking, it returns." He turned to Aaron. "You were right to bring them here." "This is Elder Maven," Aaron explained to the visitors. "He was a historian in the royal city before his exile 40 years ago. He has helped us preserve knowledge that the council would prefer forgotten." Elder Maven beckoned them toward the largest structure in the settlement. "Come. If you truly wish to learn, there is much to show you." The interior of the building was a revelation. What appeared modest from outside was revealed to be a repository of knowledge walls, lined with salvaged books, handwritten manuscripts, and technical diagrams. Tables held working models and experiments, while charts tracking beast migrations covered an entire section of wall. "You've been studying the sacred beasts all this time." The royal technician breathed his scientific curiosity, overcoming his previous skepticism. "Without the constraints of council doctrine," Elder Maven confirmed. "We've had to understand them truly, not just how to control them." For the next several hours, the exiles shared their knowledge, showing records of beast behavior, demonstrating communication techniques, and explaining the relationship they had developed with the sacred creatures. It was a vision of coexistence, rather than domination, built on mutual benefit, rather than forced compliance. "The speaking stones are critical," Elder Maven explained, pointing to Lyria's pendant. "They amplify the natural empathic abilities that all Khan people possess to some degree. With training, those with the strongest aptitude can achieve direct neural communication with the beasts." "Like what I experienced with the Earth Bear?" Lyria asked. "That was just surface contact," he nodded. "True communion goes much deeper. Through it, we can reach understanding, negotiate boundaries, and establish cooperation based on shared interests, rather than forced obedience." Warm Master Kale, who had been listening with increasing discomfort, finally spoke. "This is all very interesting as an academic exercise, but our civilization depends on reliable interaction with the sacred beasts. Voluntary cooperation seems a fragile foundation compared to the certainty of neural control. Is it so certain now? Elder Maven challenged gently. Your neural technology is failing because it violated the fundamental nature of the beasts. Our approach has sustained exile communities for generations with far fewer resources than the royal city commands. The debate might have continued, but it was interrupted by a commotion outside. They emerged from the building to find the settlement's attention focused on the sky, where a massive form was descending, a golden windhawk, larger than any Lyria had seen in the royal aviaries. The creature landed with surprising grace at the edge of the clearing, its intelligent eyes scanning the gathered humans before fixing on Lyria and her pendant. The windhawk extended one massive wing in what appeared to be a deliberate gesture. "It's inviting you," Aaron said quietly. "This is Tereth, eldest of the windhawks. He doesn't often approach settlements, even ours." Lyria felt drawn toward the majestic creature, her pendant growing warmer against her skin. Despite her father's protests, she stepped forward, extending her hand, as she had with the Earth Bear the previous night. The contact this time was even more profound. Information and sensation flowed through the connection, images of vast migrations of neural barriers, failing across territories of sacred beasts, gathering in unprecedented numbers beyond the wasteland's borders. The windhawk was showing her not just its own experiences, but a collective knowledge shared among all sacred beasts. When the connection faded, Lyria turned to the others, her expression transformed by understanding. "They're gathering," she announced, her voice carrying a new authority. "All of them, all 6 kinds of sacred beasts. The neural technology isn't just failing. It's being actively overcome through their collective consciousness. They're preparing to return to Khan territories with, or without, human cooperation." Elder Kira leaned heavily on her staff. "Then our choices are clear. Find a new way to coexist with the beasts, or face their return as adversaries rather than allies." The implications hung heavy in the air. The royal representatives exchanged troubled glances, while the exiles seemed less surprised, as if they had long anticipated this moment. "There's more." Lyria continued, the knowledge from the windhawk still fresh in her mind. "The sacred beasts remember the old ways. They remember a time when humans and beasts lived in partnership. They're not seeking revenge for the neural control, they're seeking restoration of the proper relationship." Elder Maven nodded slowly. "This aligns with our oldest histories. Before the neural technology, the Khan people and the sacred beasts shared this planet as equal inheritors, each bringing different strengths to their alliance. We need to bring this knowledge back to the Council," Elder Kira declared. "They must understand what we're facing before it's too late." But Warm Master Kale looked unconvinced. "The Council is deeply invested in the neural technology. High Elder Doris and his supporters will not easily accept that our entire approach to the sacred beasts has been fundamentally misguided." "Then, perhaps," Lyria said, an idea forming, "we should bring more than just knowledge back to the royal city." All eyes turned to her questioningly. "If words alone won't convince them," she explained, "perhaps a demonstration will. Not just a single interaction like mine with the Earth Bear, but a clear vision of what's possible when humans and beasts cooperate as partners rather than master and servant." Aaron studied her with new respect. "You're suggesting we bring exiles and free-willed beasts directly to the Council?" "To the coronation ceremony," Lyria specified. "The event celebrating my trial of terror, or what should have been my trial. Every noble house will be represented. The entire council will be present. It would be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the truth before all who hold power in Khan society." "That's," her father began, then paused, reconsidering his automatic rejection. "Actually, it might work. The ceremonial nature of the coronation would make it difficult for the council to respond with immediate force. And a public demonstration would prevent them from simply burying the knowledge afterward." "It would be dangerous," Aaron cautioned. "For the exiles certainly, but also for you, Princess. The council doesn't respond kindly to challenges to its authority. Lyria touched the violet pendant at her throat, feeling its steady warmth. I'm already bound to an exile by ancient law. My position was compromised the moment the fire lion broke free of its neural control. She looked around at the gathered faces, exile and royal united in this moment of decision. But more importantly, I've seen the truth now. I can't unsee it, and I won't pretend ignorance to protect my status. Elder Kira smiled, a glint of mischief in her ancient eyes. Well said, child of House Orin. It seems the calling law has awakened more than just a bond between two individuals. It has awakened a purpose long dormant in our society. As night fell over, the exile settlement plans were laid. Riders were dispatched to other exile communities, carrying messages about the unprecedented opportunity. The Windhawk Terith departed as well, presumably to communicate with other sacred beasts, through whatever means the creatures used among themselves. Lyria Aaron and the royal representatives would return to the city the next day, ostensibly, to report their findings to the council. Meanwhile, the exiles would prepare for a journey that many had never imagined, taking a return to the royal city they had been cast out from, accompanied by the very beasts that their neural binding expertise had made them outcasts for questioning. The coronation was scheduled for 3 days after their return time, enough to coordinate, but not so much that the council could become suspicious of their intentions. The plan was audacious and fraught with risk, but, as Lyria explained to her father under the violet moonlight, there was a certain elegant inevitability to it. The sacred beasts are returning to Khan society one way or another, she said. Either we guide that return through understanding and cooperation, or we face it as a crisis that could destroy everything the council claims to protect. Warm Master Kale regarded his daughter with a complex mixture of pride and concern. You've changed since the trial, Lyria. There's a certainty in you that wasn't there before. The calling changed me, she acknowledged. Or perhaps it simply revealed what was already there, waiting to be awakened. She touched her grandmother's pendant. Did you know what this was when you gave it to me? What it could do? Her father sighed. I suspected, though I didn't fully understand. Your grandmother spoke of connections and communications that the council dismissed as mysticism. She was sidelined in her later years, her views considered dangerously regressive. Yet you kept her pendant all this time. She was still my mother, he said simply. And though I embraced the path of technological progress that the council championed, I could never quite dismiss her wisdom entirely. She had a way of seeing beyond immediate concerns to longer patterns. He studied his daughter thoughtfully. You have that same quality. I see it emerging now. Lyria was touched by this rare moment of personal connection with her father, whose royal duties had always created a certain distance between them. Will you stand with me when we present this truth to the council? It would mean defying High Elder Doris and the other conservatives. Warm Master Kale was silent for a long moment, weighing decades of loyalty to the established order against the undeniable reality of what they had discovered in the wasteland. Finally, he nodded. I will stand with you. Not because I fully embrace this vision of partnership with the beasts. I still have reservations, but because I recognize the necessity of adaptation when old systems fail. And because you are my daughter, and your courage deserves no less than my own. Their return journey to the royal city was uneventful, but tense with anticipation. The royal guards who had witnessed the exile community and the free interaction with sacred beasts remained quiet, clearly processing the implications of what they had seen. The lone technician was more animated, already sketching designs for modified amplifiers based on Lyria's pendant. Upon reaching the city gates, they were immediately summoned to report to the council. High Elder Doris presided over the session, his expression souring, as Elder Kira recounted their experiences in the wasteland. Exile fairy tales. He dismissed when she described the settlements and their partnership with the sacred beasts. A primitive adaptation that holds no relevance for our advanced society. With respect, High Elder, The royal technician interjected, "What I observed was not primitive at all. The exiles have developed sophisticated understanding of beast neurology that potentially surpasses our own. Their methods differ from ours, certainly, but the results are impressive." "Results," Doris scoffed. "A few tamed beasts in a ramshackle settlement. How does that compare to our neural network that manages thousands of sacred beasts across all territories?" "A network that is now failing," Worm Master Kale pointed out. "The reports continue to arrive from every province. Neural bindings rejected beasts fleeing control. We cannot dismiss alternative approaches out of hand when our current system is demonstrably collapsing." The debate continued in circles, with the Conservative Council members refusing to acknowledge the severity of the crisis or the validity of the exile approach. Elder Kira and Worm Master Kale presented the case for openness to new methods, supported by Lyria's first-hand account of communication with the sacred beasts. Throughout the session, Lyria noticed that no mention was made of their plan for the coronation ceremony. The council seemed to assume that the matter had been fully presented and would now be deliberated upon, according to their usual slow, careful processes. This misconception worked in their favor, allowing preparations to continue without interference. Aaron was dismissed back to his assigned quarters in the outer ring, while Lyria returned to the palace to prepare for her coronation. The ceremony would be largely symbolic, acknowledging her completion of the Trial of Terror, or its equivalent given the unusual circumstances, and confirming her status as a full member of House Orin, with all attendant privileges and responsibilities. In the days leading up to the ceremony, Lyria found herself at the center of two parallel processes: the official preparations conducted under the watchful eyes of royal protocol officers, and the secret coordination with exile representatives through Aaron. The bond established by the calling law provided a convenient excuse for their frequent meetings, which the council monitored, but did not restrict. The night before the coronation, Lyria met with Aaron in the palace gardens, a location that offered both privacy and the plausible appearance of a romantic interlude between two people linked by ancient magic. The guards maintained a discreet distance, unable to overhear their conversation. "Everything is in place," Aaron confirmed in a low voice. "3 exile groups will arrive at different gates just before the ceremony begins. The sacred beasts will remain hidden in the forest until the signal is given." "Are there enough speaking stones?" Lyria asked. The violet pendants were crucial to their plan, allowing direct communication with the beasts in the crucial moments of the demonstration. Aaron nodded. "Elder Maven found reserves we didn't know existed. The stones were hidden by exiles decades ago, preserved for a time when they might be needed again." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Are you certain about this, Princess? Once we begin, there will be no returning to the way things were." Lyria touched her own pendant, drawing strength from its warm connection to the ancient power it channeled. "I've never been more certain of anything. The vision the Windhawk shared of humans and beasts in true partnership. It's not just possible, it's necessary. Our civilization depends on the sacred beasts, but we've been slowly destroying the very connection that makes that relationship sustainable." Aaron's expression softened. "When I answered your cry in the arena, I never imagined where the calling would lead. I acted on instinct without thought for consequences." "As did I when I screamed," Lyria admitted. "In that moment, all royal training fell away. I was simply a terrified girl facing death." "Perhaps that's the point of the calling law," Aaron suggested. "To strip away pretense and reveal the truth beneath, that we are all royal, and exile alike simply human, in the face of greater forces." Lyria considered this. "Tomorrow, we'll discover whether that truth is enough to change centuries of tradition and prejudice." The day of the coronation dawned clear and bright, the twin moons still visible as pale ghosts in the morning sky. The royal city was festooned with ceremonial decorations, and crowds lined the streets leading to the great temple, where the ceremony would take place. Lyria prepared in her chambers, attended by handmaidens who dressed her in the traditional silver and amethyst robes of House Orin. The formal attire was heavier than her usual garments, layered with symbolic elements, representing the virtues expected of a royal daughter. Around her neck, her grandmother's pendant lay concealed beneath the outer robes, visible enough to be recognized by those who knew to look for it, but not prominently displayed. Her father arrived as the final preparations were being completed. Warm Master Kale was resplendent in his ceremonial armor, the insignia of his house etched in platinum across the breastplate. "The temple is filled to capacity," he reported. "Every noble house is represented along with dignitaries from the outer territories. The council is assembled on the dais, awaiting the procession." "And our additional guests?" Lyria asked quietly, dismissing the handmaidens with a gesture. "In position," her father confirmed. "Elder Kira has coordinated with the temple guardians to ensure they will not be intercepted before the moment arrives." He placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders, his expression grave. "Lyria, you understand that what we do today may be seen as a betrayal by many of our peers. House Oren's standing could be irreparably damaged." "I understand," she replied steadily. "But I also understand that our house, like all the noble lines, exists to serve the greater good of our people. If we cling to broken systems out of fear for our status, we betray our true purpose." A smile of pride briefly illuminated her father's stern features. "Well spoken. Your mother would be proud. She always valued wisdom over mere tradition." He straightened, resuming his formal bearing. "It is time. The procession awaits." The journey to the great temple proceeded according to ancient protocol. Lyria rode in an open carriage drawn by 4 controlled lightning wolves, their silver fur crackling with contained energy. Behind her came representatives of House Oren, and before her, ceremonial guards cleared the path through cheering crowds. At the temple steps, she descended from the carriage to be met by the assembled royal houses, each offering symbolic gifts to mark her transition to full status. The gestures were familiar from countless previous ceremonies, but Lyria found herself viewing them with new eyes, seeing not just the beauty of tradition, but also its potential rigidity when unchanged for too long. Inside the temple, the full majesty of Khan civilization was on display. The vaulted ceiling was adorned with scenes from their history, including the first taming of the sacred beasts through neural technology, a moment now cast in an ironic light, given what Lyria had learned. The council members sat in a semicircle on the elevated dais with High Elder Doris at the center position, his elaborate headdress signifying his authority. Lyria processed slowly down the central aisle, aware of the hundreds of eyes following her progress. She caught glimpses of familiar faces, allied houses offering encouraging smiles, rivals watching with calculated assessment, Elder Kira with a knowing gleam in her ancient eyes. Aaron was nowhere to be seen, but that was according to plan. He would enter with the other exiles at the appointed moment. The ceremony began with traditional invocations and recitations of House Oren's lineage. High Elder Doris performed his role with practiced dignity, though Lyria could detect an undercurrent of tension in his manner, likely due to the ongoing crisis, with the neural bindings reports of which continued to arrive throughout the territories. "Princess Lyria of House Oren," Doris intoned, when the preliminaries were complete, "you stand before the assembled nobility, having faced the trial of terror. Though circumstances prevented the traditional completion of the trial, the council recognizes that you confronted fear itself when the fire beast broke free of control, and you demonstrated the courage expected of your bloodline." Ironic, Lyria thought that he would highlight the very moment that had sparked everything that was to come. The moment when she had screamed in genuine terror, setting the calling law in motion. "By the authority of the council," Doris continued, "I confirm your full status as a daughter of House Oren, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." He lifted an ornate circlet from a ceremonial cushion held by an attendant. "Receive now the mark of your station to be worn in service to your house and to all Khan people." This was the moment they had planned for, when all attention would be focused on the central ritual, and when protocol would make an interruption most effective. Lyria glanced briefly toward her father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. As High Elder Doris raised the circlet to place it upon her head, the great doors at the rear of the temple swung open. A collective gasp rose from the assembled nobility as the unexpected procession entered. Eren led the way, no longer dressed in the simple garments of exile or the compromise clothing provided in the royal city. He wore the traditional attire of a Khan warrior from before the Neural Age, leather and cloth adorned with symbols of partnership with the sacred beasts. Around his neck gleamed a speaking stone identical to Lyria's. Behind him came representatives from the exile settlements, men, women, and children of all ages, each wearing some variation of the speaking stones. They moved with dignity, despite the shocked murmurs that rippled through the temple. But what truly caused astonishment was what followed the human exiles. Padding calmly into the sacred space came the sacred beasts themselves, not just one or two, but dozens. Earth bears with moss-covered fur, fire lions with manes of controlled flame, lightning wolves crackling with silver energy, water serpents flowing like liquid sapphire void panthers, shifting in and out of shadow, and windhawks soaring in the temple's vaulted heights. None wore neural binders. All moved with evident intelligence and purpose, forming a living corridor that extended from the doorway to the central dais where Lyria stood. High Elder Doris froze the coronation circlet, still suspended in his hands. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" he demanded, his voice straining to maintain authority, despite his evident shock. Eren stopped at the foot of the dais, the exiles and beasts arrayed behind him. "No outrage, High Elder. We come in peace to demonstrate a truth that the Council has refused to acknowledge." "Guards!" Doris shouted, but Elder Kira rose swiftly from her seat. "Hold," she commanded, with surprising force for one so ancient. "Blood shall not be shed in the sacred temple, and certainly not against those who enter without weapons." She gestured toward the exiles, who indeed carried no visible arms. The temple guards hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities. In the moment of uncertainty, Lyria descended from the dais to stand beside Eren, facing the council and the assembled nobility. "Honored council, noble houses of Khan." She began, her voice clear and strong. "What you see before you is not a threat, but an opportunity. For generations we have controlled the sacred beasts through neural technology, believing this to be the only way to maintain our civilization. But that technology is now failing, not through simple malfunction, but because it was fundamentally flawed from its inception." Murmurs spread through the assembly. None could deny the reports of neural binding failures that had been arriving with increasing frequency. The exiles. Lyria continued, gesturing to those who stood with Eren, have discovered, or rather rediscovered, another way. A way of partnership rather than domination, of communication rather than control. To demonstrate, she removed her outer robe, revealing the speaking stone at her throat. The pendant glowed with violet energy, resonating with the similar stones worn by the exiles. At some unseen signal, a young fire lion padded forward from the exile group, approaching Lyria without hesitation. The nobility watched in stunned silence as the princess knelt beside the beast, placing her hand upon its flame-wrapped head. The fire neither harmed her nor diminished, instead seeming to flow around her fingers like water. "The sacred beasts are not simply animals to be harnessed," she explained, rising to her feet while the fire lion remained calmly at her side. "They are intelligent beings with whom we once shared this world as partners. The neural technology severed the natural connections that existed between our species, replacing mutual understanding with enforced obedience. As that technology fails, we face a choice: to attempt to reimpose control that is fundamentally unsustainable, or to relearn the partnership that sustained our ancestors." High Elder Doris had recovered somewhat from his initial shock. "This is absurdity," he declared. "The neural technology has been the foundation of our civilization for centuries. Without it, we would descend into primitive chaos, at the mercy of beasts that could destroy us on a whim." Is that what you see here? Aaron challenged, gesturing to the sacred beasts that remained perfectly calm throughout the temple. These creatures could indeed destroy us if they wished. They always could, neural technology notwithstanding. The bindings were never as absolute as the council claimed. The beasts accepted them because they did not yet have the collective knowledge to resist. That has changed. To emphasize his point, one of the Void Panthers stepped forward, its form seemingly shifting between solid matter and shadow. With deliberate movements, it approached the dais, where the council sat, causing several members to recoil in fear. However, the beast made no aggressive move, instead, gazing directly at High Elder Doris, with unmistakable intelligence. "The sacred beasts are reclaiming their freedom," Lyria said into the tense silence. "This is happening throughout all territories with or without our cooperation. We can either face this change as a crisis that threatens everything we've built, or embrace it as an evolution that may lead to something better than what came before." Elder Kira descended from the council dais to stand beside Lyria and Aaron. "What the princess says is true. I have witnessed it myself in the exile territories. The partnership they have established with the sacred beasts is real and effective, not a primitive regression, but a sophisticated alternative to our failing technology." One by one, other allies joined them. Warm Master Kale, the royal technician who had visited the wasteland, even a few forward-thinking members of other houses who recognized the truth in what they were witnessing. A line was being drawn within the temple, not between royal and exile, but between those willing to embrace necessary change and those clinging to a system that was demonstrably collapsing. High Elder Doris looked out at the assembly, recognizing that opinion was shifting before his eyes. His authority, based on centuries of technological domination over the sacred beasts, was eroding as rapidly as the neural bindings themselves. "What precisely are you proposing?" he asked finally, his tone suggesting a grudging willingness to listen, if not yet to concede. Lyria glanced at Aaron, who nodded encouragingly. Together, they presented the vision they had developed with the exile elders, a gradual transition from neural control to partnership using the speaking stones to establish communication with the sacred beasts throughout Khan territories. The exiles would return as teachers and translators, sharing their hard-won knowledge with the royal city. The trial of terror would be replaced by a trial of connection, where young nobles would learn to communicate with the beasts rather than simply withstand fear in their presence. "This transition will not be easy," Lyria acknowledged. "Generations of reliance on the neural technology have atrophied our natural abilities to connect with the sacred beasts. But the potential exists within all Khan people. It is our birthright, temporarily set aside, but not lost forever." As she spoke, several of the younger nobles moved hesitantly closer to the sacred beasts, curiosity overcoming their initial fear. A child from one of the minor houses approached a small, lightning wolf cub, showing none of the trepidation that adults had been conditioned to feel. The cub responded with equal interest, extending tentative contact that made the child laugh with delight. It was a small moment, but profoundly symbolic, the natural connection that existed before conditioning, still accessible to those without rigid preconceptions. The debate continued for hours within the temple, ranging from practical concerns about implementation to philosophical questions about the proper relationship between humans and the sacred beasts. Not all were convinced, but the undeniable reality before them: peaceful beasts without neural control, responding to human communication through the speaking stones, made even the staunchest conservatives reconsider their positions. By the time the twin moons rose that evening, casting their violet light through the temple's crystal dome, a consensus had begun to form. The neural technology would not be abandoned overnight. Such an abrupt transition would indeed cause chaos, but a parallel system of communication through the speaking stones would be established, beginning in areas where the neural bindings had already failed. The exile communities would be formally recognized, and their members permitted to return to Khan society, bringing their knowledge and experience to guide the transition. A new council position would be created, Voice of the Beasts, to represent the interests of the sacred creatures in decisions that affected them. And at the center of it all stood Princess Lyria and Aaron, bound by the calling law that had started as a quirk of ancient tradition and evolved into the catalyst for fundamental change. Their bond, once seen as an unfortunate complication, was now recognized as symbolic of the new relationship being forged between previously separated groups, royal and exile, human and beast, tradition and innovation. As the formal coronation finally resumed, much altered from its intended form, High Elder Doris placed the circlet upon Lyria's head with an expression that mixed resignation and reluctant respect. "Princess Lyria of House Oren," he declared, "you have brought change to our society in a manner none could have predicted. Whether history judges this day as the beginning of a new golden age or the start of our unraveling remains to be seen. But your courage in facing both the fire beast and the weight of tradition cannot be denied." Lyria accepted the circlet with a formal bow, then straightened to address the assembly one final time. "The trial of terror was meant to teach us to face fear with courage," she said. "Today, we have learned a deeper lesson that there are times when the greatest courage lies not in facing fear alone, but in calling for help when truly afraid, and in answering when others call. The sacred beasts were never our servants to command, but our partners in creating the world we share. In remembering this truth, we don't diminish our civilization, but elevate it to what it was always meant to be." As she spoke, the fire lion that had approached her earlier pressed against her side in a gesture that needed no translation. Throughout the temple, sacred beasts and humans began tentative interactions, the speaking stones glowing softly as ancient connections were gradually carefully restored. Outside the temple walls, word of the extraordinary events spread throughout the royal city and beyond. The news would soon reach the furthest territories, carried by windhawks, flying without neural guidance for the first time in centuries. Sacred beasts choosing to serve as messengers, not from compulsion, but from the rekindled partnership that had once been the foundation of Khan civilization. In the years that followed, the transition was indeed challenging. Old habits and assumptions proved difficult to change, and not all of the sacred beasts were immediately forgiving of generations of neural control. But the path forward had been irrevocably altered on the day when a princess had stood beside an exile in the great temple, demonstrating a truth that could no longer be denied. The law of calling, once dismissed as an archaic curiosity, came to be recognized for what it truly was, a reminder that in moments of genuine crisis, artificial boundaries between people become meaningless, and that wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places, even in the wasteland beyond the walls of certainty. And Princess Lyria of House Oren, who had entered her trial of terror, expecting to face fear alone, discovered instead the power of connection to a human, who answered her cry to sacred beasts, who shared their ancient wisdom, and to a future where partnership replaced domination as the foundation of a society reborn from the ashes of a technology that had promised control but delivered only temporary illusion. In the end, the story that echoed through generations was not of a princess saved by a human's last arrow, but of a civilization saved by the courage to acknowledge a simple truth, that the mightiest walls are those we build in our minds, and the greatest strength comes not from domination, but from the willingness to join hands across the boundaries that divide us.